Can you imagine going to a child and who wants to, I don't know, do whatever they want to do? I mean, like, just really doesn't seem that realistic. How do you encourage a child? They're on that bike and they're terrible. And we're like, you're doing great. Yeah. And we're freaking out. We're so excited for them. And they're falling and they're not doing all that well. And objectively, they're awful bikers, or they're objectively terrible at what they do. But we are encouraging them and helping them see what's possible and helping them feel good about that little step that they just took, the little accomplishment they just had. What if we lived our adults life like that too?
Hey everyone, today we have Dr. Sasha Heinz, who is an expert in behavioral change and positive psychology, who has a Bachelor of Arts from Harvard, a Ph.D. in developmental psychology from Columbia, and a Master's in positive psychology from UPenn. She definitely has academia covered and a lot more than that. Sasha, welcome.
Thanks, Jason. So good to be here.
On your website, I appreciate your humor about all of your degrees.
We could have an entire podcast episode deconstructing my drive to get those 3 Ivy League degrees.
And so with that said, what I found immediately interesting about you is how you described how your practice. It was clear to me you were not a traditional psychologist. So to start there, for our audience who's not familiar with you, can you talk a little bit about what's different about you and your approach than other psychologists we all may encounter in the real world or on Zoom somewhere?
Interesting. I don't know. I mean, I think I do positive psychology, what we call, and then I went back into what we call business as usual psychology. So I had the benefit of being on both sides. Why there are sides, I don't know. But nonetheless, I was one of the earliest people to be in the field of positive psychology as a graduate student. So, back then it sort of felt like a fringe field of study in psychology, and now not as much, which is a good thing. But I think the thing that really differentiated me from my colleagues was I was always interested in health, well-being, optimal human functioning. I was really interested in human potential. I was less interested in disease, disorder, and pathology. I mean, it's all over my family, so perhaps I should have been more interested in it, but maybe that's why I wasn't. I just was always so interested in the questions of what makes life worth living, what's possible for us. I think that we have such a narrow view of what we can accomplish, what we can achieve, what we're capable of. And it's so exciting to see and to study extraordinary people, people that self-report as being, very satisfied with their life. Why? I mean, I think that to me is extremely interesting.
Well, let's go right there. You posed all the big questions. So let's start with the first one. What makes life worth living? I think, look, there's a mental health epidemic. So many people are just flat out unhappy, unwell. What makes life worth living? What have you found in your research?
Fundamentally, I would say, 2 things. One is relationships, the quality of the relationships that you have. And I think, very related to that is meaning and purpose. I think that we derive so much meaning and purpose from the relationships that we have. So they're sort of hard to parse out, but it's not about, and I take umbrage with people, have this idea of positive psychology as happyology. Not at all. I think that what we've really found in actually spending time to study well-being is understanding what are the components of a life well lived. And fundamentally, it is about having a life that feels meaningful to somebody, to feel that your life matters to you and it matters to other humans.
And so I have a lot of questions now. So how does one, so you've got relationships, meaning, and purpose. If I'm listening, I'm saying, okay, I got it. Now, what do I do next? How do I start to evaluate the relationships if they're quality relationships that are meaningful and have, dovetailing to meaning and purpose? Does my life have meaning? Do I have purpose? Uh, how does one go about that process right now? I know it's a big, I know it's hard to generalize. It's a big question, but
Well, I mean, I think that this is one of the reasons why, and I will say this, like, I'm never call myself a positive psychologist because I didn't get my doctorate in that field. I'm an adult developmental psychologist, but, or a developmental psychologist, and I focus on adulthood than childhood. But I think that this is what has been so wonderful about the field of positive psych, which is really being able to deconstruct what is the good life, and how can we actually examine this with a little bit more rigor. um, and I think, understanding that positive emotion is a component of it, but it's almost invariably it's a byproduct, more than something. It's like we feel good as a byproduct of doing good. And I think if anything, positive psychology has really shown us this sort of well-doing. It's not necessarily well-being. It's how are you taking action, specific actions to that we can actually, boost or increase your well-being. It's possible to do these things with some very simple exercises. But what does it include? Engagement, feeling deeply engaged in his flow state. That's a big one. And relationships, meaning, and then achievement is the final component. So positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement, sort of the um, theory of well-being. So, but isn't that good to know that it's expansive, and it doesn't mean that you had to have won the genetic optimist lottery. Some people have a temperament that's more sunny, but that doesn't necessarily matter, which I think should be good news to everybody.
yeah, I love that you said, I haven't heard this. This is a new one. I love it though. Well doing instead of well being. It reminded me, we had Arthur Brooks on the show a couple months ago. And for me, one of the big take home messages in terms of purpose and having a fulfilling life is action, is giving back, is not necessarily seeking public or professional accolades. It was, doing meaningful work, having meaningful relationships, uh, essentially doing things. He starts the book by telling a powerful story of he wouldn't name the individual, but a very distinguished, successful man in his 80s. He's sitting behind him on a flight. He doesn't know who it is. And he hears the guy talking to his wife saying, I'm miserable. No one needs me anymore. Why am I still alive? And Arthur's like, this guy's terrible. Like, he's terrible shape. And then he gets off the plane. He sees who it is. And he's like, oh my God, this is like one of the most well-respected, accomplished. and so I'll pause there. I think I made the point, but I love this idea of doing. In that case, the man stopped doing, becomes miserable. And with all that said, do you think in this field, in our space, whether it's, self-help, personal development, positive psychology, we're kind of overcomplicating it? Just like, start doing something, start to get back, start to feel grateful. What do you think?
I agree. I think that we could simplify it in the sense that everything with children is okay. Raising children is not simple. I'm not saying that. I have two children. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, bar bar none. However, there's some basic truths that we sort of all accept in the world of child development. For example, there are basic milestones that kids should meet over the course of their education. There are basic skills that we expect kids to accomplish, like, They were able to separate from their parents. We all agree that kids should be able to do this, right? That they are able to go to school and not feel as anxious about being away from their primary caregiver, and they learn to interact with the world, and then they learn basic social emotional skills at school, and they're learning all these things. Okay, and we have a framework for this that we've all loosely agreed upon. Now, there are a lot of arguments about pedagogy, but nonetheless, we've agreed that having some kind of structure around a child's development makes sense. And then we emerge into adulthood and there's nothing, nothing. And we pretend like this growth and development stops. But what Arthur Brooks was listening to on that airplane was someone in a developmental crisis, that they hadn't mastered the developmental tasks of his stage of life. By the way, those accomplishments when you're in that process of building your career, right on target, right? Mastery, competence, growth, you're building your career, you want to get better. Okay, but then as we get older, our role in society, our role as someone who's, gone through all of these things changes. And the developmental perspective that we have should also change. It becomes less about us. It becomes more about giving back. It becomes more about, what does George Vaillant call it? Generativity, the stage of generativity, where our job is really giving to the generation below us or 2 generations below us. And then beyond that, being a keeper of meaning, being someone who plays the role maybe in one's family, maybe in one's community, of reminding people of what matters, and being the historian, being the person that, when things are the world is going haywire, and I call my dad, who's almost in his 80s, his perspective is longer and bigger and wider. And he's like, well, yeah, this is a tough time. I've seen many tough times, and I'm still here. So, having that perspective, a 25-year-old, no matter how wise they are, can't have that. So, and wisdom doesn't necessarily correlate with age. So are we engaging in our own growth and development beyond those schooling years? And for most people, the answer is no. And if they are, it's very catch as catch can. It's with a stack of self-help books on their bedside table, with little implementation, with little support, with little community.
And so it seems like there is no standard, if you will, also in the way we have standards for children, but it also seems we probably shouldn't have a standard. And there are various schools of thought. There are various life stages. I fall guilty to sometimes equating age with wisdom, but to your point, not always the case. So with all that said, if you could tear down the house and start from scratch, I think of the myths. We touched on positive psychology. We talked about self-help. We talked about happiness. What are the biggest myths in those 3 buckets: positive psychology, self-help, and happiness? What in your opinion you just think we're really getting wrong?
Goodness, that's a good question, a big one. What are we getting wrong? I think we get wrong on both ends of the spectrum, where the sort of that it's all about feeling good and we should be focusing on feeling good. And then this other side of the spectrum that's saying, that's upset about this idea of toxic positivity, which is not positivity. It's just denial.
Yeah. What is that? Can you walk me through the fine line of when positivity becomes toxic? When does it cross over?
I mean, it's such a subjective, it really is subjective. How do you decide where that line is? But the distinction to me would be, are you committing to reality or not? My colleague, Scott Barry Kaufman, who was taught at Penn for a while, but anyhow has the psychology podcast. He so beautifully was saying, and I think it was either Viktor Frankl who said it, but anyway, he called it tragic optimism, and I was like, right, this is what positive psychology is actually about. It is the acknowledgement that life is so hard and life includes suffering, period. And the idea that, our task is to hunt the good stuff in the midst of life being hard. And I think people get this very wrong. Even psychologists, I mean, um, the disdain, is that the right? I think that is actually the right word. It sounds a little dramatic, but it really was. The field of positive psychology was met with disdain in the larger field of psychology when it first emerged. Like, this is fluffy, this is frivolous, this is, not serious. And I beg to differ. I think if we take as a basic premise that life is extremely challenging for every single one of us, nobody, gets out unscathed, isn't living life with the lens of, I'm going to look for what's right, I'm going to hunt the good stuff. Like, isn't that something that we should all aspire to? I think so. Certainly. But anyhow, so I think that's incredibly important, is understanding, number one, that the study in the field of positive psychology, or, I think people have with sort of, they mock some of this self-development work as like, oh, it's cheesy, or it's all good vibes only. It's like, that is so untrue. The reason that people engage in this work is not because life is easy. It's because somewhere in their life, they've struggled and but maybe what it signifies is that they want more, or they're hoping for more, or they're hoping that life could get better than it currently is. And to suggest that that's not possible, to me, is the most depressing, heartbreaking truth. Like, it isn't a truth, but it's just the most, I can't even, can you imagine going to a child and who wants to, I don't know, do whatever they want to do, and being like, just really doesn't seem that realistic, right? I mean, that's what I mean. Like, if we could just simplify things, how do you encourage a child? You're like, I mean, they're on that bike and they're terrible, and we're like, you're doing great. Yeah. And we're freaking out. We're so excited for them. And they're falling and they're not doing all that well. And objectively, they're awful bikers, or they're objectively terrible at what they do, but we are encouraging them and, helping them see what's possible, and helping them feel good about that little step that they just took, the little accomplishment they just had. What if we lived our adults life like that too?
For me personally, I am an optimist. I believe in the power of optimism. I think there are a number of studies that point to the power of optimism in terms of longevity. But I have also read that and you've talked about this, pessimism actually has some upside as well. Can we talk a little bit about the upside of pessimism? When is pessimism valuable?
Pessimism, and sorry, did I not answer your question about toxic positivity and denial? Anyway, the line basically is like, if you're not in the arena of reality, then we're just in denial. But if we're like acknowledging the reality of things and we're hunting the good stuff, and seeing what's possible and believing in what's possible and acknowledging the reality, then we're mentally healthy, and it's okay. Pessimism and optimism, I mean, they both play a role. They're both important. Order of operations matters. So I would recommend that you try optimism before you launch into your pessimism. So at least you get going, or at least you can see a bigger picture. But in the goal setting literature, dream big, and then brush that dream up against reality, against the hard, cold reality, which is, maybe your skill set, maybe the current climate, maybe, resources or whatever it is. And then, but you're looking at those obstacles as something to overcome. Then you need to, using a sort of strategic mindset of like, okay, well, these are the obstacles. How am I going to overcome these things? It may take longer than you want, but that's the job. But we want to first think big and then actually being pessimistic, so to speak, and thinking like, okay, how is this not going to work? How is this going to go wrong? And planning for those things makes you far more likely to actually accomplish the goal. Because if we stay in fantasy and, just dream the big dream, but don't actually take uncomfortable action, which any accomplishment requires a lot of uncomfortable action. That's just the law of nature. That's how it works. If we're just staying in that dream space, we won't actually activate ourselves to do anything. Because dreaming feels good. It actually reduces our blood pressure. It makes us relaxed. So we fantasize about this incredible future, and then we don't take action toward that future. So if we really want to make that dream into a reality, your pessimism is on your side. That little friction, that anxiety of like, oh gosh, this is going to be hard, or oh gosh, this is going to require some effort on my part. That little bit of tension or inner friction actually is important because it activates us to take action. It makes us do something.
I think Tim Ferriss said this. He's found it to be helpful. And I thought it was a good tip is sometimes think of the worst possible thing that could happen with whatever thing you're stressed about or whatever goal you have. Like if A, B, and C go wrong, and you walk through it and you wrap your head around it. And oftentimes you say, hey, that's actually, okay, I could figure that out. Or that's maybe not so bad. But with that said, you mentioned mindset. And you've also talked about mindset hacks, and they don't work. We all love hacks. I mentioned Tim Ferriss, 4-hour work week, 4-hour body, 4-hour, I love hacks. If you tell me I can do something in 15 minutes versus an hour, I'm in. But with regards to mindset, I think so much when I think of happiness, I think of health, I think of just life. Mindset is everything. But you say mindset hacks don't work. Why don't mindset hacks work in your opinion?
I mean, it depends on what they are, but this notion that we're going to find the quickest. A hack to me is something that reduces effort, right? It makes things easier somehow. It's going to take the hard part out. And I think that that's often not the case with, I think people give up quickly because something feels challenging or hard. So, I mean, perhaps like a semantic difference of, don't think about it as a mindset hack. Think about it as perhaps like a new approach. Or because, by the way, what Tim is doing, and funnily enough, I went to boarding school with Tim Ferriss, so it's so funny because I remember reading his book, and one of my friends from high school was like, "You remember Tim, right? I mean, we went to school with him." I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's the same Tim Ferriss?"
I'm guessing he was quite different.
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, a brilliant guy. I know a wrestler in high school, and a brilliant guy. But I think that we have this idea that there's some magical elixir that someone's got it figured out and someone's doing it better than we are. And it's like every single one of us has a human brain. So the struggles that you're having, I can guarantee that most people are having the same struggles that you're having because they also have a human brain. So to me, it's really more about changing your daily habits of how you interact with your brain or your mind rather than it is like, here's a hack, here's a trick, because I think when we get into this sort of, here's the way to make it easy, and it doesn't work for someone, then they kind of throw in the towel and they're like, see, didn't work. But what Tim is suggesting that you do, which is entertaining the idea that something could go wrong, sitting with it and recognizing, okay, it's possible that the future me who might encounter this problem, like I think the future me could probably handle it. They don't have the skills. I don't have the skills that my future self will have. So yeah, everything that, I handled all the things in the past, I'll probably be able to handle it in the future. So you're essentially distancing yourself. It's just a way of, and most mindset work is helping people develop the skill of self-distancing, of being able to distance, your essential self, the observer, from the thinker. And the better you get at that, of distancing you as the observer versus you as the thinker, the more deliberate and conscious your life can be. And that, in my opinion, is 100% a skill that you need to learn and develop.
And so how do you get there, in your opinion? Meditation, mindfulness?
Practice. For some people, it works with meditation, where they're able to sort of see their thoughts, or let their thoughts sort of float by. For other people, I teach a method where you're writing them down and looking at what, objectively, this thought creates this emotion, and when I'm feeling this emotion, what do I do? So you can kind of see the consequences of your thinking. And just being able to write it down, taking it out of your head, putting it on paper, can allow you to have that distance. And in the ACT literature, acceptance and commitment therapy, that's the idea of, our task is to diffuse from our thinking. So we get into trouble when we're so fused with our thinking that we can't see around it. We're seeing through it, and believing that that's true, as opposed to it's our opinion in the moment.
On the subject of getting into trouble, you used a term on your Instagram, which I found to be funny and thought-provoking: emotional Novocaine. Still laughing about that.
It's probably what I work on most with my clients.
So how do you define emotional Novocaine, and what are some of the signs?
Emotional Novocaine is just a phrase I just made up to mean anything that you do to numb. So anything that you do somewhat compulsively to avoid feeling feelings, whether that's boredom, whether that's, some kind of dread of doing something, shame, embarrassment, sadness, loneliness, disappointment, whatever it is engaging in some kind of behavior to numb or avoid those feelings. So it can have a lot of different flavors of emotional Novocaine. Everyone has their own version of it, or multiple versions of it.
So it could be alcohol, could be drugs, could be sex, could be spending too much time on Instagram.
Totally. It could be scrolling Instagram. It could be gossiping with friends. It could be, engaging in other people's problems, could be someone's emotional Novocaine. Instead of dealing with what's going on in their life, they love digging in with someone else. It could be any of those things, anything that you're doing to some extent compulsively. It could be shopping. It could be eating emotionally. Right. It's like you're not doing it for the pure enjoyment of the actual activity itself, but for its distracting powers.
And we've all done it. I found myself.
Every single one of us. Everyone does. And by the way, sometimes you just need to, right? I mean, life is challenging, and there are times when you're like, man, I just need a break from all this. And so that's not a bad thing, but it can become, it can become a problem when we're engaging in it in a way where it becomes compulsive, or we really don't have we've lost our autonomy to it.
So I'm going to come back to where we started: mental health. Obviously there's a crisis. A lot of people aren't doing well. They're not happy. We've got an opioid crisis. People can't focus. There's ADHD. I just think that there's just so much going on. And you talked about action, and something I know you're passionate about, which I want to spend time on in our closing, is mental fitness. I remember we used to do this amazing event called Revitalize. We did it every year up until 2020. I wonder what happened then. The first one we did in 2014, Dan Harris was the opening speaker, and he said, I predict in the future people are going to be talking about mental exercise in the same way they talk about physical exercise. 2014, that came true. And it's something you're passionate about, is mental fitness. And so assume that we've got a healthy, smart group of listeners. Assume they're doing all the kind of the right things and taking care of themselves. They're doing all the good stuff. In closing, how should we all be thinking about mental fitness? And to me, one of the core messages is, even if you're well, you still need to take care of yourself. It's like, even if you're physically fit, you still go to the gym. You don't wait until you get out of shape. So let's spend some time on mental fitness and what you're focused on and what should we all be thinking of, regardless of how we feel.
There are three things that I think if you want to increase your capacity for mental fitness. And what I mean by that is really being more resilient, being more agile, being more flexible, being able to handle more, more robust, more sturdy in your mental health. I would say there are three things that you really need to practice. One is challenging your thinking, genuinely observing the stories that you tell, the stories you tell others, the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of, your identity, and all of these things that absolutely shape our reality, and questioning them, number one, and having a practice of observing and questioning them. Secondly, increasing our tolerance for challenging emotional states. So, can you increase your tolerance of discomfort in some way? Whether that's frustration, whether that's disappointment, whether that's whatever that is, vulnerability. Can you increase your tolerance of those and try to avoid them less? As you'd be engaging in less emotional Novocaine if you could handle them better, right? So that's the second one. And then thirdly, taking action and closing that intention action gap and building that muscle of keeping one's promise to oneself, that, building that relationship with yourself, that you trust yourself, and you really taking action on the things that you intend to do, right? So you're closing that gap. And if you can work on those three things, your life will be so much richer. You will be able to experience more. You'll be able to handle more. You'll be able to take more calculated risks in your life in a positive way. Like, I don't know, let's see what I'm capable of, and be able to look back on your life and think, man, I've really changed. I've really grown. I really do see that I am, the 10-year, the version of me now, the 10-year younger version of me, she couldn't have imagined, what I can handle or what I know or what I could do, right? There's a true growth arc. And we want to always have our future self looking back on us and saying like, yeah, I've really grown. I've really developed. I can really handle more. And to me, that is our great task in life, is to continue to grow in that way, in the same way that kids do in childhood. They look back and they think, man, second grade me couldn't have done this. Fourth grade me can do this. Second grade me could never have done this. And that we have the same relationship with ourselves in adulthood, where we're looking back and we're like, yeah, 35-year-old me would not have been able to handle this, and so on and so forth, into our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, beyond, until cradle to grave.
And what do we get so wrong? What do we as adults just completely screw up in this process?
We forget that we're supposed to be growing. That's part of it. We act as if it's sort of this, like it's a choice that for people who are just into that. I'm just in people. Those people are into self-development. It's like, hold on a second here, right? I think this is the one fundamental thing we get wrong, is we all fundamentally agree that children develop. So do adults. But we pretend it's like, this person is into it and this person is. And I'm like, no, we're all in this process of growth and development. Some people are stalling, and that causes a lot of psychological distress. If you're not growing, normative is growing. If you're not growing, it's no wonder that you don't feel great. It's no wonder that things, you may feel that like, I feel stuck. I feel unhappy. I feel depressed. I feel anxious. All of these things that we're feeling, that's normal.
Well said, Sasha. Thank you so much.
That's been such a pleasure. Thanks so much.